The sole heir of a millionaire struggles with an incurable illness, without any medical answers. In the mansion, where the silence is heavy, the arrival of a housekeeper and her daughter brings a change. The child begins to react with small gestures of curiosity toward the quiet and sensitive girl. If this beautiful story of overcoming adversity and love has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. Rain beat against the mansion's windows, as if it wanted to wash away all the sadness that inhabited those silent rooms. Edward Morrison watched through the fogged glass, but his eyes didn't truly see the garden landscape. For months, perhaps years, he had lost the ability to see any beauty in the world. Everything was confined to that second-floor room, where his only son, Gabriel, was wasting away between white sheets and incessantly blinking medical equipment. The 42-year-old businessman no longer recognized himself in the mirror. Grey hairs had appeared overnight, the wrinkles around his eyes had deepened, and the impeccable suit that once accompanied him to business meetings had been replaced by crumpled clothes he wore for days on end. Morrison Development, the company he had built from scratch and which grossed millions a year, was now running on autopilot, commanded by managers who made decisions without consulting him. Edward simply couldn't bring himself to care about contracts, profits, or achievements anymore. None of it made sense when his 8-year-old boy was there, so small and fragile in that enormous bed. Gabriel had been born when Edward and Helen had already lost hope of having children. After 15 years of marriage, when doctors claimed it was impossible, the miracle happened. Helen used to joke that Gabriel was her divine gift, sent to complete the family they had dreamed of for so long. He was a curious, bright child, full of questions about the world. He loved to draw airplanes, dreamed of being a pilot, and would run through the mansion chasing the property's cats. His laughter echoed through the hallways, transforming the luxurious house into a true home. But that was before the mysterious illness that began with unexplained fevers, before the tests that showed nothing conclusive, before the specialists who would gather, discuss, prescribe increasingly complex treatments, and return the following week with the same worried expressions and the same vague explanations. Gabriel slowly lost his energy, like a candle slowly burning out. He stopped running, then walking long distances, then talking much until he reached his current state, lying down most of the day, staring into nothingness, as if his soul had disconnected from his small body. And Helen was no longer there to help him face it. The memory of his wife was a wound that never healed. Helen had died 2 years earlier, a victim of a car accident on a rainy night just like this one. Edward still blamed himself for not having picked her up from her sister's house. If he hadn't stayed late at work, if he had paid more attention to her pleas to leave earlier, maybe Gabriel would still have his mother to care for him now when he needed her most. Helen had always known how to handle the boy's emotions better. She had a special sensitivity, a gentle way of talking that could soothe anyone. Edward, on the other hand, had always been more pragmatic, more direct. And now he felt completely lost in the face of his son's fragility. The sound of footsteps in the hallway brought him back to reality. Dr. Robert Fitzgerald, the pediatrician who had been monitoring Gabriel for almost a year, was coming up the stairs accompanied by the head nurse, Marlene. The two were coming for the weekly assessment, a ritual Edward had learned to dread. Not because he expected good news, but because with each consultation, it seemed clearer that they were losing the battle. The doctor was a man in his 50s with completely grey hair, always impeccably dressed. He had a practice in the most affluent area of London and a solid reputation among high society families. When Gabriel began to show the first symptoms, Edward spared no expense to get Dr. Fitzgerald to take the case. He paid for expensive consultations, set up what was practically a mini hospital inside the house, and imported equipment from the United States. Nothing seemed to be enough. "Good afternoon, Edward," the doctor greeted, entering the room with a serious expression that had become all too familiar. "How has Gabriel been this week?" "The same as always," Edward replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "He barely speaks, eats very little, and spends most of his time lying down. He had a fever again last night." Dr. Fitzgerald nodded, making notes on his tablet. Let's examine him. We may need to adjust his medication again." The three of them went up to Gabriel's room. The room was always dimly lit, with the curtains partially drawn so as not to bother the boy's sensitive eyes. Gabriel was awake, staring at the ceiling, with the vacant expression that had become his trademark in recent months. When he saw the adults enter, he didn't even turn his head. "Hi, Gabriel," the doctor said, approaching the bed with a forced smile. "How are you feeling today?" The boy didn't answer. For weeks he had barely spoken to anyone, limiting himself to nodding or shaking his head in response to direct questions. Edward felt his heart ache every time he witnessed that silence. His son, who was once so communicative, now seemed to have given up on connecting with the world. Dr. Fitzgerald performed the routine examination, checking his heart rate, blood pressure, and temperature. Marlene, an efficient and always serious woman in her 40s, took notes and organized the medications Gabriel was supposed to take throughout the day. It was an impressive amount: anti-inflammatories, vitamins, supplements, antibiotics, fever reducers. Edward sometimes wondered if it wasn't too much, but whenever he questioned it, the doctor would explain that each medication had a specific function in combating the disease's symptoms. "What worries me most," said Dr. Fitzgerald after finishing the exam, "is the lack of response to the treatments. We're going to try a new protocol next week. There's a new drug that recently arrived from the United States, still in its experimental phase, but it has shown promising results in similar cases." "Experimental?" Edward asked, frowning. "Is that safe for him?" "Edward, Gabriel's situation is critical," the doctor replied, lowering his voice. "We need to try every available option. This drug might be our best chance." Marlene remained silent, organizing the medicines on the bedside table. Edward noticed she seemed tense, but attributed it to the gravity of the situation. For the past few months, the entire medical team seemed to walk on eggshells when discussing Gabriel's condition. After the doctor and nurse left, Edward was alone with his son. He sat in the armchair beside the bed, watching Gabriel's pale face. The boy had the same brown eyes as his mother, but now they seemed dull, lifeless. Edward reached out and gently touched his son's blonde hair. "I don't know what to do anymore, my son," he murmured, feeling tears burn in his eyes. "Your mother would have known how to help you. She always knew. I miss her so much. And I'm so afraid of losing you too." Gabriel turned his head slightly, looking at his father for a few seconds before staring back at the ceiling. That brief eye contact was enough for Edward to feel a pang of hope. Maybe there was still something of his boy in there, fighting to get out. That night, Edward went to the office on the ground floor of the mansion. The walls were covered with family photos: his wedding to Helen, holiday trips, baby Gabriel, Gabriel taking his first steps, Gabriel on his first day of school. A lifetime of joy that now seemed to have happened to someone else, in another reality. He opened his laptop and started researching his son's illness. It wasn't the first time he'd done this, but he always hoped to find something new, some revolutionary treatment, some specialist who could offer a different answer. The internet was full of stories of miraculous cures, of children who had overcome inexplicable diseases, but there were also many accounts from families who had gone through the same anguish and didn't have a happy ending. He was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. It was his brother Richard, who called every night to see how Gabriel was doing. "Hi, Edward. How was your day?" "The doctor was here. He wants to try a new experimental drug." "And are you going to agree to it?" Edward was silent for a few seconds. "I don't know, Richard. Sometimes I wonder if we're not just making Gabriel suffer for nothing. He takes so many medications, goes through so many tests, and I don't see any improvement." "You can't give up, brother. Gabriel needs you to be strong." "It's just that I feel so helpless. I have the money to pay for any treatment, any doctor in the world, but I can't save my own son." Richard sighed on the other end of the line. "Have you thought about seeking a second opinion? Maybe another doctor at another hospital?" "I've already consulted with several specialists. They all reached the same conclusion. Gabriel's disease is very rare, very aggressive. Dr. Fitzgerald is considered an authority on the matter. Even so, it wouldn't hurt to try. Sometimes a different perspective can bring new insight." After hanging up, Edward thought about his brother's words. Maybe it really was worth seeking other medical opinions. But he also knew that Helen had trusted Dr. Fitzgerald immensely. It was she who had insisted he take the case when Gabriel first started showing symptoms. Helen always had a keen instinct for people, and if she trusted the doctor, it was because she saw something special in him. The next morning, Edward woke to the sound of voices downstairs. He went down the stairs and found Marlene talking to a woman he didn't know. The stranger was a woman of simple appearance, with black hair tied in a bun and clean but well-worn clothes. Beside her stood a quiet girl of about 7, holding her mother's hand and observing everything around her with large, attentive eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison," said Marlene. "This is Carmen Sanchez, the new cleaner. The employment agency sent her yesterday. Remember you asked to hire someone to help with the house cleaning?" Edward had completely forgotten. In recent weeks, with all his attention focused on Gabriel, many details of household management had been neglected. The mansion really did need extra care, especially with the constant flow of doctors, nurses, and technicians. "Of course," Edward replied, extending his hand to Carmen. "Welcome." Carmen had a tired look, but her eyes conveyed a quiet strength. "Thank you very much for the opportunity, sir. This is my daughter, Sophia. I hope you don't mind her staying with me while I work. I have no one to leave her with." Edward looked at the girl, who greeted him with a shy nod. Sophia had curly brown hair, olive skin, and wore a simple but neat dress. There was something in her expression that reminded him of Gabriel when he was younger, a contained curiosity, an intelligence that shone in her eyes. "No problem," Edward replied. "I just ask that you keep away from the second floor during the morning. My son is unwell and needs quiet." "Of course, sir. Sophia is very well behaved. You won't even notice she's here." Marlene accompanied Carmen to show her the house and explain the cleaning routine. Edward returned to his office, but couldn't concentrate on his work. For the first time in a long time, there were different voices echoing through the mansion. Carmen had a gentle way of speaking, almost a whisper, and Sophia was completely silent. Even so, their presence brought a new energy to the environment. During lunch, Edward went upstairs to check on Gabriel. He found the boy in the same position as always, lying down and staring into space. But as he approached the window to adjust the curtains, he noticed something different. Pillow. In the garden near the pool area, Sophia was sitting under a tree drawing in a small sketchbook. She seemed completely absorbed in the activity, oblivious to everything around her. For a few minutes, Edward watched the girl. There was a peace in her movements, a concentration that contrasted with the constant hustle of the medical team that circulated through the house. Sophia drew with precise movements, paused to observe something in the distance, then resumed drawing. Every now and then she would look up towards the second-floor windows as if she sensed she was being watched. "Gabriel," Edward called softly, "want to see something interesting?" The boy didn't react immediately, but after a few seconds, he turned his head towards his father. Edward carefully lifted him into his arms and carried him to the window. "See that girl down there? She came with her mother today. It looks like she likes to draw just like you used to." Gabriel looked in the direction his father indicated. For a moment his eyes seemed to brighten slightly. Sophia, as if sensing his gaze, looked up and gave a discreet wave to the window. Gabriel didn't wave back, but he continued to watch the girl until Edward placed him back in bed. That night, for the first time in a long time, Gabriel ate a little more than usual. He also didn't have a fever and slept without the nightmares that frequently woke him. Edward didn't know if it was a coincidence, but something had changed in the house's atmosphere. It was as if a gentle breeze had entered for the first time in months, bringing with it the possibility that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Carmen and Sophia returned the next day and the days that followed. The house's routine began to naturally reorganize around the discreet presence of the two. Carmen worked in silence, always mindful of the doctors' and nurses' schedules, never disrupting the health team's movements. Sophia continued to draw in the garden, always in the same spot, always focused on her solitary activity. Edward began to observe them more closely. Carmen had a natural efficiency that did not go unnoticed. She cleaned each room as if it were her own home, with special attention to detail. And Sophia, despite her young age, showed an impressive maturity. She never asked for anything, never complained, never made a sound. It was as if she instinctively understood that this house was going through a delicate time and that her presence should be as discreet as possible. On Thursday of that first week, Edward came down for breakfast and found Carmen organizing the kitchen. She had brewed an aromatic coffee that filled the entire house with a welcoming scent. "Good morning, Carmen. How are you settling in here?" "Very well, Mr. Morrison. It's a beautiful house, very well kept." "And Sophia, doesn't she get bored spending the day here?" Carmen smiled for the first time since she had arrived. "Sophia has always been a quiet girl. Since she was little, she learns more by observing than by asking. She likes it here." "Why does she always draw in the same spot?" "She said that from there she can see the whole sky. She says she likes to draw clouds." Edward nodded, feeling a strange pang in his chest. Gabriel also used to say he wanted to touch the clouds when he grew up and became a pilot. It was one of those small coincidences that made Edward wonder if there was something special about this whole situation. That afternoon, when Dr. Fitzgerald came for his weekly visit, Edward mentioned the presence of the new cleaner and her daughter. "They're not in the way at all," he assured him. "In fact, I think they've brought a different energy to the house." The doctor's expression turned concerned. "Edward, you know that Gabriel's immune system is compromised. Any contact with outsiders could pose a risk of infection. But they keep their distance from his room, and everyone who works here undergoes regular health screenings. Even so, it's better to be cautious. Gabriel's condition is too delicate to take unnecessary risks." After the doctor left, Edward thought about their conversation. On one hand, he understood the concern for Gabriel's health. On the other, for the first time in a long time, he felt that something positive was happening in the house. And he had the impression that Gabriel himself was reacting differently to their presence. He decided to talk to Carmen about the situation. He found her in the garden, watching Sophia draw. The girl was drawing a picture of a house with several windows, and in one of them was a small figure that looked like a child. "Carmen, I need to talk to you about something." "Of course, sir." "My son's doctor is worried about the risk of infection. It's nothing personal against you, but Gabriel's immune system is very fragile." Carmen nodded with understanding. "I understand perfectly, sir. The boy's health comes first. If necessary, I can come to work on days when he's not at home or at different times." "I don't want you to leave," Edward said, surprising himself with his own firmness. "I'll talk to the doctor again. Maybe we can find a way to reconcile the two things." Sophia looked up, listening to the conversation. For the first time since she had arrived, she spoke. "The boy in the window is sad." Edward and Carmen looked at each other. "How do you know that?" Edward asked, crouching down to the girl's level. "I see him sometimes. He looks down from up there with sad eyes, just like my little brother before he got better." "Your little brother was sick?" Edward asked. Carmen answered, "Sophia has a younger brother who had a health problem when he was a baby. She's always been very sensitive to these things." "And did he get better?" "Yes, sir, it took time. But he did." Edward felt something stir inside his chest, a tiny spark of hope that he had learned to smother to avoid disappointment. But there it was, lit again, fueled by the simple words of a 7-year-old girl who looked at the world with eyes full of understanding. The second exchange of glances happened on a Sunday morning, when Carmen wasn't working, and the house breathed a different kind of silence. Edward had asked the medical team to reduce their weekend visits in a desperate attempt to give Gabriel at least 2 days of peace. Marlene still came to administer the medications, but the other professionals only appeared in case of an emergency. Edward was in the garden, trying to read some contracts that Richard had insisted he approve, when he noticed movement at the gate. It was Sophia, alone, standing outside the property. The girl was looking through the bars with a thoughtful expression, as if she were making an important decision. "Sophia," Edward called, approaching the gate. "What are you doing here? Where's your mother?" "She went to the pharmacy to get medicine for Mrs. Irene, our neighbor," Sophia replied, in that soft voice Edward had come to recognize. "I wanted to see if the sad boy was feeling better." Edward felt a tightness in his chest. "How did you know I was home?" I didn't, but I thought he might need a friend. There was such a pure simplicity in that answer that Edward found himself opening the gate before even thinking about the consequences. Do you want to come in for a little while? But you can't go up to see Gabriel. He's very weak. Sophia nodded seriously. I know. Mom explained to me that he has an illness that makes people very tired. They walked together to the garden, where Sophia instinctively headed for the same spot where she usually drew during the week. Edward noticed she was carrying a small backpack from which she took out her sketchbook and some colored pencils. Can I ask you something, Sophia? You can. Why do you always draw while looking up at Gabriel's window? Sophia stopped arranging her pencils and looked directly at Edward. It was amazing how those child's eyes could convey so much depth. Because sometimes people get so sad they forget there are still beautiful things in the world. When my little brother was sick, I would draw for him to remember that butterflies still existed, that the sun still rose every day, that I was still there. Edward felt tears burn in his eyes. And did it work? It took time, but it worked. He started looking at my drawings, then he wanted to hold the pencil, then he wanted to draw with me. The doctor said that when he started drawing again, that's when she knew he was going to get better. What doctor? Dr. Marcia, from the local clinic near our house. She took care of my brother when he had pneumonia. Mom says she has the hands of an angel. Edward was curious. Sophia's experience with her brother's illness seemed very different from the journey he was on with Gabriel. What was your brother's treatment like? Dr. Marcia gave him a few medicines, but she said the most important thing was for him not to be sad. She said that when a child gets very sad, their body forgets how to be strong again. The girl's words echoed in Edward's mind. Gabriel took so many medications that Edward sometimes wondered if the boy's body wasn't overloaded. But Dr. Fitzgerald always assured him that every medicine was essential. Sophia, can I see your drawings? The girl opened her sketchbook without hesitation. The pages were filled with colorful drawings, houses with flower-filled gardens, children playing, smiling animals, heart-shaped clouds. But there were also some different drawings. A child in a bed, surrounded by people in white, with a sad expression. In another drawing, the same child was standing, holding another child's hand, and both were smiling. Is this your brother? Edward asked, pointing to the second drawing. It is. This is when he got better. He's holding my hand because I promised I would stay with him until he didn't need to be afraid anymore. Edward turned a few more pages and found recent drawings that clearly depicted the mansion. There was a drawing of the house from the outside, another of the garden with the tree where Sophia used to sit, and a final one that caught his attention, a second-floor window with a child looking down, and in the garden another child looking up. Between them, Sophia had drawn little floating hearts. This drawing, it's the boy in the window and me. I think he wants to be my friend, but he doesn't know how. At that moment, Edward heard approaching footsteps. It was Marlene arriving to administer Gabriel's afternoon medication. The nurse seemed surprised to see Sophia there. Mr. Morrison, I thought we agreed it was best to avoid visitors. Sophia isn't a visitor, Marlene. She's the daughter of Carmen, our employee. Marlene looked at Sophia with an expression Edward couldn't decipher. Even so, sir. The medical protocol is clear about Gabriel's isolation. Sophia closed her sketchbook and started putting her pencils back in her backpack. I was just leaving anyway. Mom should be back from the pharmacy soon. You don't have to go because of this, Edward said, but Sophia was already on her feet. It's all right, Mr. Morrison. I'll be back on Monday with my mum. After Sophia left, Edward went up to Gabriel's room with Marlene. The boy was awake, looking out the window. When Edward approached, he noticed that Gabriel's eyes were following Sophia's figure as she walked away down the street. Did you see the girl, son? Gabriel nodded almost imperceptibly. It was the first clear reaction he had shown in weeks. Marlene prepared the syringe with the afternoon medication. Edward looked at the amount of medicine and frowned. Isn't that a bit much for a child his size? It's the dosage Dr. Fitzgerald prescribed, sir. He knows what he's doing. But Gabriel is losing so much weight. Sometimes I think it would be better to reduce the medications a little. Let his body rest. Marlene stopped what she was doing and looked at Edward firmly. Mr. Morrison, with all due respect, you are not a doctor. If we start questioning every prescription, we could put Gabriel's life at risk. Edward fell silent but continued to watch as Marlene administered the injection. Gabriel winced in pain, and his breathing became a little heavier. Minutes later, the boy began to show signs of drowsiness. Does he always get like this after the medication? It's normal. His system needs rest to process the treatment. After Marlene left, Edward was alone with Gabriel. The boy had fallen asleep, but it didn't seem like a peaceful sleep. His forehead was furrowed as if he were having bad dreams. Edward sat in the armchair beside the bed and watched his son sleep. It was then that he noticed something strange. On the bedside table there was a note that Marlene had dropped without realizing it. Edward picked up the paper and saw that it was a handwritten reminder. Protocol B, maintain current dosage, weekly report to lab. Lab? Edward had never heard of any lab being involved in Gabriel's treatment. Dr. Fitzgerald always talked about the hospital where he worked, but he never mentioned a partnership with labs for research. Edward put the paper in his pocket, deciding to ask about it at the next consultation. But a strange feeling began to grow inside him, a sense that there were things about his son's treatment that he didn't know. On Monday, Carmen and Sophia returned to work. Edward had spent the weekend thinking about his conversation with Sophia and the mysterious note he had found. He decided to pay closer attention to Gabriel's medical routine. "Carmen," Edward said when he found her tidying the kitchen, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, sir." "When your youngest son got sick, how long did the treatment last?" Carmen stopped drying the dishes and thought for a moment. "It was about 3 weeks. Dr. Marcia said that childhood pneumonia, when treated properly, doesn't take long to cure. The important thing was not to overload his system." "Overload how?" "She explained that a sick child needs medicine, but also needs affection, hope, a reason to want to get well. When you only look at the illness and forget to look at the child, the treatment doesn't work properly." Edward nodded. "And did you follow any special protocol?" "The doctor gave him antibiotics for a week, vitamins for 2 weeks, and told us to do things that would cheer Lucas up. Sing to him, tell him stories, show him drawings. She said joy is also medicine." "Joy is also medicine." Edward repeated the phrase in his mind. When was the last time Gabriel had shown any joy? When was the last time anyone had tried to make the boy smile instead of just administering medication? "Mr. Morrison," Carmen said, lowering her voice, "can I say something?" "Of course." "Since we arrived here, I've noticed that the boy takes a lot of medicine. A lot. When Lucas was sick, he took 2 medications a day. Here, I see the nurse go up with trays full of medicine several times a day." Edward felt his stomach clench. "Do you think it's too much?" "I'm not a doctor, sir, but I am a mother. And one thing I've learned is that when a child is taking too much medicine, sometimes they get sick from the medicine itself." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Fitzgerald for his weekly visit. Edward went up to attend the consultation, but this time he paid attention to details that had previously gone unnoticed. The doctor examined Gabriel with his usual efficiency, but Edward noticed that he barely spoke to the boy. He didn't ask how Gabriel was feeling, if he was in pain, if he was scared. It was a purely technical examination. "Dr. Fitzgerald," Edward said, "I have a question about the treatment." "Of course." "How long does a treatment like the one Gabriel is undergoing usually last?" The doctor paused. "Edward, every case is unique. Gabriel's illness is complex. It requires prolonged monitoring. But it's been almost a year. Isn't there some estimated timeline for seeing significant results?" "We are seeing results. Gabriel is stable." "Stable, but not improving." Dr. Fitzgerald put his instruments back in his bag with movements that were slightly more abrupt than usual. "Edward, I know it's difficult for a father to accept, but not all illnesses have a quick cure. The important thing is that Gabriel is not getting worse." "And what about the new experimental drug you mentioned last week?" "It arrived yesterday. We will start the administration today. It's a new hope for cases like Gabriel's." Marlene brought in a small box with a medication Edward had never seen before. The label was in English, and there were several experimental stickers on the packaging. "Has this drug been approved by the British regulatory agencies?" Edward asked. "It's in the process of approval, but we have special authorization for use in extreme cases," the doctor replied. Edward felt a chill. "Extreme cases? Is Gabriel's condition that serious?" "Edward, would you prefer I be direct with you?" "I would. Gabriel is losing the battle against this disease. This medication may be our last chance to reverse the situation." The silence that followed was heavy. Edward looked at his son, who seemed smaller and more fragile than ever in that enormous bed. How had it come to this? How had his boy, who 2 years ago was running around the house dreaming of being a pilot, turned into this apathetic child who barely reacted to the world around him? After the doctor and Marlene left, Edward went down to the garden for some fresh air. Sophia was in her usual spot, drawing. When she saw him approach, she looked up. "You're worried," she said with that impressive perception she seemed to have. "I am, Sophia. Very worried. Want to see something?" Sophia opened her sketchbook to a new page. It was a drawing of a child in a hospital bed, but this time the child wasn't alone. There were other people around, a woman who was clearly a mother holding the child's hand, a man who looked like a doctor, but who was smiling and talking to the child, and several other children, some also in beds, but all looking at each other, communicating in some way. "This drawing is different from the others," Edward observed. "It's because I understood something. When my brother was sick, he didn't get better just because of the medicine. He got better because we didn't let him feel alone." Edward looked up at the window of Gabriel's room. "Do you think Gabriel feels alone?" "I think he feels very alone, even with so many people taking care of him." "How can you be so sure?" Sophia pointed to the drawing. "Because when someone feels lonely, even when surrounded by people, their eyes are empty, just like Gabriel's eyes when he looks out the window." Edward sat on the grass next to Sophia. For the first time since Helen had died, he felt that someone truly understood what was happening. A 7-year-old child had managed to see something that all the specialists had missed. Gabriel wasn't just physically ill, he was emotionally isolated. "Sophia, would you like to meet Gabriel?" The girl's eyes lit up. "Can I really?" "I'll talk to the doctor. Maybe it's time we tried a different approach." Sophia closed her sketchbook and looked seriously at Edward. "Mr. Morrison, can I tell you something my grandmother always used to say?" "You can." "She used to say that sometimes medicine forgets that people aren't just bodies, that we have hearts, souls, and a need to feel loved, and that when you only treat the body and forget the rest, the cure isn't complete." Those words echoed in Edward's mind for the rest of the day. That night, when he went to check on Gabriel, he found the boy awake, looking out the window. The moon was full and illuminated the garden where Sophia used to draw. "Gabriel," Edward said, sitting on the edge of the bed, "would you like to meet the girl who draws down there?" Gabriel turned his head and looked at his father. For the first time in months, Edward saw something like interest in his son's eyes. "She draws clouds," Gabriel murmured, his voice so low that Edward almost didn't hear it. They were the first words Gabriel had spoken spontaneously in weeks. Edward's heart raced. "Would you like to see her drawings?" Gabriel nodded, almost imperceptibly, but he nodded. Edward made a decision right then. The next day, regardless of what Dr. Fitzgerald or Marlene said, he would find a way for Sophia and Gabriel to meet. Maybe traditional medicine wasn't working, but perhaps there was another kind of healing waiting to be discovered. A healing that began with friendship, continued with hope, and was completed by the memory that, even in the most difficult times, there was still beauty in the world. And sometimes that beauty was 7 years old and knew how to draw heart-shaped clouds. The meeting between Gabriel and Sophia took place on a Tuesday morning, when Marlene had left to pick up new medications and Dr. Fitzgerald wasn't due until the afternoon. Edward had planned everything carefully, choosing a time when medical supervision was more relaxed. It wasn't that he wanted to hide anything, but he was sure it would be easier to ask for forgiveness later than to ask for permission beforehand. Carmen was cleaning the living room when Edward came down the stairs carrying Gabriel in his arms. The boy weighed very little for his 8 years, and Edward could feel the prominent bones through his clothes. Gabriel was awake, but as always, with that absent expression that had become his trademark. "Carmen," Edward called softly. "Where is Sophia?" "In the garden, sir, as always." Carmen stopped arranging the sofa cushions and looked at Gabriel with a motherly expression. "How is he today?" "He had a quiet night, and for the first time in a long time, he talked about wanting to see Sophia's drawings." Carmen smiled. "Sophia will be very happy. She always asks about him." Edward walked towards the garden, feeling Gabriel shift slightly in his arms. The boy was looking around with more attention than he had shown in weeks. When they went out through the glass door leading to the patio, Gabriel blinked several times, as if the natural light bothered him after so much time confined in the dark room. Sophia was in her usual spot, under the large jacaranda tree surrounded by colored pencils, with her sketchbook open on her lap. Seeing Edward approach with Gabriel, she calmly closed the sketchbook and stood up, but without making any sudden movements. There was a natural delicacy in the way she behaved, as if she instinctively knew she should be cautious. "Sophia," Edward said, crouching down to sit on the grass and positioning Gabriel beside him, leaning against a cushion he had brought. "This is Gabriel. Gabriel, this is Sophia." Sophia gave a small wave, but didn't approach immediately. Instead, she stayed where she was and smiled gently. "Hi, Gabriel. I always see you in the window." Gabriel didn't respond verbally, but his eyes fixed on Sophia with an intensity Edward hadn't seen in a long time. It was as if the boy was truly seeing someone for the first time in months. "Do you want to see my drawings?" Sophia asked, opening her sketchbook again. Gabriel nodded almost imperceptibly. Sophia approached slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal, and sat down at a respectful distance. She opened the sketchbook to the first page. "This one is my favorite," she said, showing a colorful page full of clouds shaped like animals. "This cloud here looks like a rabbit, this one looks like a fish, and this big one here looks like a friendly dragon." Gabriel looked at the drawing for a long time. Then, in a weak, hoarse voice, he murmured, "I used to like airplanes." "Airplanes are cool," Sophia replied naturally. "Do you want me to draw an airplane for you?" Gabriel nodded, and for the first time in months, Edward saw something resembling a smile on his son's lips. It was just a hint of a smile, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Sophia took a blank sheet from the back of the sketchbook and began to draw. Her movements were precise and confident, and in a few minutes, a drawing of an airplane flying among the clouds appeared. But it wasn't an ordinary airplane, it was an airplane with heart-shaped windows leaving a trail of colorful stars in the sky. "There," she said, offering the paper to Gabriel. "This is a magic airplane. It can fly anywhere in the world and always brings happiness with it." Gabriel held the paper with both hands, as if it were something very precious. Edward felt a lump in his throat as he saw his son delicately touch the drawing. "Thank you," Gabriel whispered, and then something happened that Edward hadn't witnessed in over 6 months. Gabriel smiled, a real smile which lit up his pale little face and brought life back to his brown eyes. Sophia beamed with joy. "Do you want to draw with me?" Gabriel looked at his father, as if asking for permission. Edward nodded, feeling tears burn in his eyes. Sophia offered a colored pencil to Gabriel, who took it with trembling fingers. For the next hour, the two children drew together in silence. It wasn't an empty silence like the one that had dominated the mansion for months, but a comfortable silence, full of concentration and discovery. Gabriel made simple strokes, still without much coordination, but there was purpose in his gestures. Sophia drew beside him, occasionally offering gentle suggestions or showing him how to make certain shapes. Edward watched everything from a respectful distance, amazed at the transformation he was witnessing. Gabriel was more alert, more present than he had been in a long time. His cheeks had a bit more color and he was breathing more regularly. "Dad," Gabriel called out suddenly, startling Edward. "Can I show Sophia my room?" The question caught Edward by surprise. For months, Gabriel had avoided any mention of the room, which had become a sort of medical prison. "Are you sure, son?" "I'm sure. I want to show her my old toys." Edward looked at Sophia, who was waiting patiently. What do you think, Sophia? I would love to see Gabriel's room. The three of them went up the stairs slowly, with Edward carrying Gabriel again. The boy had tired from his time in the garden, but he was still more animated than usual. When they reached the room, Sophia looked around with curiosity, but without showing shock or pity. It was just genuine interest. "Wow, what a big room," she said. "And look at all the toys." Gabriel pointed to a shelf where his toy airplanes, untouched for months, were stored. "Those are my airplanes. I had a collection. Can I see them?" Edward took a few of the small planes and brought them near the bed. Sophia examined them carefully, making enthusiastic comments about each one. "This one must fly really fast," she would say, or "This one is so colorful it must be from a happy airline." Gabriel began to tell stories about each airplane, memories of when he was healthy and dreamed of being a pilot. His voice was weak, but there was a growing excitement in his tone. Edward couldn't believe what he was seeing. In 1 hour with Sophia, Gabriel had spoken more than he had in the entire previous month. The magical moment was interrupted by the arrival of Marlene, who came up the stairs and found the scene. Her expression immediately turned severe. "Mr. Morrison, what is going on here?" Gabriel was getting to know Sophia. They were getting along very well. "You know this is against all medical recommendations. Gabriel cannot have close contact with other children." "Marlene, look at him," Edward said, pointing to Gabriel, who was still holding one of the small planes and looking at Sophia with interest. "When was the last time you saw him like this? Awake, engaged? It doesn't matter how he appears to be, the medical protocol is clear. His immune system is compromised." Sophia stood up calmly. "It's okay. I understand that Gabriel needs special care." "No," said Gabriel, surprising everyone with the firmness in his voice. "I want Sophia to stay." It was the first time in months that Gabriel had expressed any desire or preference about anything. Edward's heart raced. "Marlene, just a few more minutes." "Mr. Morrison, I will have to report this to Dr. Fitzgerald. He will not be pleased at all." After Marlene left, visibly annoyed, Edward felt torn. On one hand, he saw Gabriel more alive than he had been in a long time. On the other, he began to worry about the possible consequences of having disobeyed medical orders. "Sophia," Edward said, "I think it's best if you go find your mother, but that doesn't mean you can't be friends." Sophia nodded maturely. "I understand, Mr. Morrison. Gabriel, can I come back another day to draw with you?" "Yes," Gabriel replied, with a small but genuine smile. "I'll keep the airplane drawing." After Sophia went downstairs, Edward was alone with Gabriel. The boy was still holding the toy airplane and seemed more awake than he had been in weeks. "How do you feel, son?" "Better," Gabriel answered. "Sophia is nice. She doesn't look at me like I'm going to break." Gabriel's observation hit Edward like a punch to the gut. It was true. All the adults who circulated there looked at Gabriel as if he were extremely fragile, as if any sudden move could hurt him. Sophia, on the other hand, had talked to him naturally like one child talks to another. "Gabriel, do you feel very tired after taking your medicine?" Gabriel thought for a moment. "Yes, sometimes I don't want to sleep, but after the medicine, I can't stay awake." "And when you don't take medicine?" "I feel less heavy, like this morning, before the nurse came." Edward frowned. Gabriel was more lucid and engaged precisely during the period when he had spent more time without medication. It could be a coincidence, but a suspicious pattern was beginning to form. When Dr. Fitzgerald arrived late that afternoon, he was visibly displeased. Marlene had reported the incident, and the doctor did not hide his irritation. "Edward, we talked about this. Gabriel cannot have contact with other children. Doctor, I saw my son more alert today than he has been in months. He spoke, he smiled, he showed interest in things that haven't interested him in a long time." "That could just be a temporary improvement. We can't take risks." "What risks exactly?" "The girl is healthy. She doesn't have any contagious diseases." Dr. Fitzgerald hesitated for a moment. "The problem isn't just the risk of infection. Gabriel is at a very delicate stage of his treatment. Any change in his routine could interfere with the effectiveness of the medications." What do you mean? The patient's emotional state can affect the absorption of medications. If Gabriel becomes overstimulated, he could have adverse reactions. Edward found the explanation strange. Doctor, may I ask a question? How long have you been treating cases like Gabriel's? For many years. Why do you ask? It's just that in talking with other people, it seems that similar treatments usually last a much shorter time and use far fewer medications. The doctor drew himself up. Edward, every case is unique. It's not advisable to compare treatments. That only creates unnecessary anxiety. But isn't almost a year of intensive treatment without significant improvement too long? We are about to see results with the new experimental drug. But for that to work, Gabriel needs to be in a completely controlled environment. After the consultation, Edward went down to talk to Carmen. He found her in the kitchen preparing dinner with Sophia helping her. Carmen, can I ask you something about your youngest son's experience? Of course, sir. Did the doctor who treated him ever mention that positive emotional stimulation could hinder the treatment? Carmen stopped chopping vegetables and looked at Edward in surprise. On the contrary, sir. Dr. Marcia always said that a happy child heals faster. She encouraged us to do things that made Lucas happy. And did it work? It worked very well. When Lucas started playing again, that's when she knew he was truly healing. Sophia, who was listening to the conversation, looked at Edward. Mr. Morrison, can I say something? You can, Sophia. When my little brother was sick, Dr. Marcia told my mom something I never forgot. What did she say? She said there are two types of doctors in the world, the doctor who treats the disease and the doctor who treats the person who has the disease, and that we should always choose the second type. Edward felt a shiver. The words of a 7-year-old child had perfectly synthesized the feeling he had been having about Gabriel's treatment. That night, Edward couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the difference between the Gabriel he had met in the morning, alert, communicative, interested, and the Gabriel who had fallen asleep after taking his evening medication, lethargic, pale, absent. He decided to do something he had never done before, research the new experimental drug Gabriel was taking on the internet. What he found left him deeply disturbed. The drug had been withdrawn from clinical trials in the United States, following reports of severe side effects in children. There were several mentions of laboratories that continued to test the drug in countries with less stringent regulations. Edward printed all the information he found and put it in a folder. For the first time since Gabriel had fallen ill, he began to suspect that his son's problem might not just be a mysterious disease, but something much more serious and deliberate. The next morning he woke up with a firm resolution. He was going to seek a second medical opinion, regardless of what Dr. Fitzgerald thought about it. Gabriel deserved at least a chance to be examined by someone who would look at him as a child who needed to heal, not as a clinical case to be managed. And if his suspicions were correct, if there was something terrible happening under his own roof, he would do whatever it took to protect his son and ensure the truth came to light. The second medical opinion Edward sought came from an unexpected source. On Thursday morning, while trying to decide which hospital to contact, he received a call from his sister-in-law, Patricia, Helen's sister. Edward, I know you don't like it when I meddle, but I can't stop thinking about Gabriel. How is he? Patricia, Edward hesitated, unsure how to summarize the emotional roller coaster of the past few days. Actually, I'm very confused about his treatment. Confused how? Edward told her about the meeting with Sophia, Gabriel's sudden improvement during the morning without medication, and his discoveries on the internet about the experimental drug. Edward, you need to talk to Dr. Beatrice Moore. Who is she? An exceptional pediatrician who works at the Royal London Hospital. She was Helen's professor at university, remember? Helen always spoke of her with great affection. Dr. Moore specializes in complex cases and has a very humanized approach to medicine. Edward vaguely remembered Helen mentioning her old professor. Do you think she would agree to examine Gabriel? I'm sure of it. She adored Helen. I'll call her right now. 2 hours later, Edward received a call from Dr. Moore herself. Her voice was warm and firm at the same time. "Edward, Patricia told me about Gabriel's situation. I would very much like to help. I can make a house call this afternoon if you'll allow it." "You would do that?" "Gabriel is Helen's son. It's the least I can do. Besides, from the symptoms Patricia described, I have some suspicions I'd like to investigate." "What kind of suspicions?" "I'd rather not create expectations before examining the child. Can I come by at 5 this afternoon?" Edward agreed, but decided not to tell Dr. Fitzgerald about the visit. Something told him it would be better to keep it a secret, at least until he understood what was happening. During lunch, Gabriel was more awake than usual. Marlene hadn't yet administered the afternoon medication, and the boy was taking advantage of this period of lucidity to talk to his father. "Dad, is Sophia coming back today?" "I don't know, son. Why do you ask?" "I liked drawing with her. It's been a long time since I remembered that I liked to draw." Gabriel's sentence struck Edward like a lightning bolt. His son was saying he had forgotten things he enjoyed. How could an 8-year-old child forget his own preferences? "Gabriel, do you remember other things you used to like to do?" Gabriel thought for a long moment, with a concentrated expression. "I like playing football in the garden, and making those huge towers out of building blocks, and—" He paused, frowning. "Why can't I remember some things properly, Dad?" Edward felt his stomach clench. "What kind of things can't you remember?" "Sometimes I try to remember, Mom, but it's like there's a fog in my head, and some days I don't really remember what happened." It was as if something was affecting Gabriel's memory. Edward made a mental note to ask Dr. Moore about it. At 5 o'clock sharp, a woman in her 50s rang the mansion's doorbell. Dr. Beatrice Moore had a striking presence. Grey hair tied in an elegant bun, very attentive blue eyes, and a smile that conveyed both confidence and warmth. "Edward, it's so good to meet you in person. Helen spoke so much about you and the dream you both had of starting a family." Edward led her to the living room, where they talked for a few minutes before going up to see Gabriel. The doctor wanted to understand the full history of the case first. "Tell me how it all began," she requested, taking a small notebook from her bag. Edward recounted Gabriel's first symptoms, the initial diagnosis, Dr. Fitzgerald's arrival on the case, and the entire progression of the treatment. Dr. Moore took notes, but Edward noticed her frowning several times during his account. "Edward, may I see the medication Gabriel is currently taking?" He brought a tray with all the medicines. Dr. Moore examined each bottle, reading labels and making notes. Her expression grew increasingly worried. "Is this amount of medication really necessary?" "It's what Dr. Fitzgerald prescribed." "And this experimental drug?" Edward showed her the box with the English labels. The doctor examined it carefully, and her expression turned grave. "Edward, this drug was banned in the United States 6 months ago. There are serious reports of neurological effects in children." "Neurological effects?" "Memory loss, excessive drowsiness, apathy, difficulty concentrating. The symptoms you've described in Gabriel." Edward felt the world spin. "Are you saying the medicines could be causing the symptoms instead of curing them?" "It's a possibility that needs to be investigated. May I examine Gabriel now?" They went up to the room where Gabriel was awake, looking out the window. Upon seeing the unknown doctor, he flinched slightly, but Dr. Moore approached with a natural ease that quickly put him at ease. "Hi, Gabriel. I'm Dr. Beatrice. I was a friend of your mum's when she was younger." Gabriel looked at her with interest. "You knew my mum?" "I did. She was very special, just like you." "May I examine you?" The examination Dr. Moore conducted was completely different from anything Edward had witnessed in recent months. She talked to Gabriel throughout the process, asking him questions about how he felt, explaining what she was doing. It wasn't a cold clinical examination, but a respectful medical conversation. "Gabriel, can you tell me how you feel after you take your medicines? I get very tired, and sometimes a bit confused. And how do you feel in the morning before you take them?" "Better, more awake." "Do you like to draw?" "I do. Yesterday I drew with a girl named Sophia." Dr. Moore smiled. "That's wonderful. And how did you feel when you were drawing?" "Happy. It had been a long time since I remembered feeling happy." After the examination, the doctor asked to speak with Edward in private. They went down to the office, where she carefully closed the door. "Edward, I need to be direct with you. Gabriel does not have the symptoms of a rare disease. He has the symptoms of medicinal poisoning." "What do you mean?" "What I witnessed up there is a child who is being systematically sedated and poisoned. The medications he is taking, in this quantity and combination, are enough to keep a child in a permanent state of lethargy." Edward felt his blood run cold. But why would anyone do that? That's the question we need to answer. But first, Gabriel needs to stop these medications immediately. And what if there really is an underlying disease? "Edward, I've been examining children for 25 years. Gabriel is not sick. He is being medicated to appear sick." The silence that followed was deafening. Edward tried to process the information, but it was too big, too terrible to accept at once. "Doctor, what do you think I should do?" "First, we're going to wean Gabriel off this medication gradually but quickly. Second, we need to investigate who is behind this and why." "And Dr. Fitzgerald?" "He is either being deceived by someone or he is part of the scheme. Either way, Gabriel cannot remain under his care." Dr. Moore laid out a gradual detoxification plan for Gabriel and promised to return the next day. Before she left, she made an observation that echoed in Edward's mind. "One thing strikes me. Cases like this of excessive medication in children often involve unauthorized clinical trials. Someone may be using Gabriel as a guinea pig." After the doctor left, Edward was alone in his office, trying to organize his thoughts. Everything was starting to make a terrible kind of sense. Dr. Fitzgerald's insistence on keeping Gabriel isolated, the excessive amount of medication, the banned experimental drug, Gabriel's sudden improvement when he was off the medication. He decided to do something he should have done a long time ago: examine all of Gabriel's medical documents from the beginning of the treatment. He took out a large folder where he kept all the reports, prescriptions, and test results and began to organize them chronologically. What he discovered horrified him. There was a clear pattern. Whenever Gabriel showed signs of improvement, the dosage of medications was increased. Whenever he showed interest in an activity, a new experimental drug would appear for testing. And there were several prescriptions signed by doctors Edward had never met, with professional registration numbers he couldn't verify. Even more disturbing, he found copies of reports that appeared to be sent regularly to a pharmaceutical lab called Biotech Research, a company that Edward discovered, after a quick internet search, was under investigation for illegal practices in several countries. He was so absorbed in analyzing the documents that he didn't notice when Carmen entered the office to clean. She was wiping a bookshelf when she saw the look of horror on Edward's face. "Mr. Morrison, is everything all right?" Edward looked at her, and for a moment he considered telling her everything he had discovered. Carmen had shown a special sensitivity to Gabriel's situation, and her observations about the excessive medication had been one of the first clues that led him to question the treatment. "Carmen, can I ask you a very serious question?" "Of course, sir." "In the months you've been working here, have you noticed anything strange about Gabriel's treatment?" Carmen hesitated for a moment, as if carefully weighing her words. "Can I tell you the truth?" "Please." "From the first day I got here, I thought it was very strange for a child to take so much medicine. And even stranger that he got worse instead of better. Did you notice anything else?" Carmen looked around as if making sure they were alone. "The nurse, Marlene, she always gets very nervous when someone watches her prepare the medicines. And once I saw her talking on the phone about reports for a laboratory." Edward felt a shiver. "What kind of conversation?" "She was saying that the effects were as expected and that she was going to send a weekly report. When she saw I was nearby, she hung up quickly." "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" "Sir, I'm just a cleaner. Who would believe me against a famous doctor?" Edward stood up from his chair and approached Carmen. "Carmen, I need you to help me. I think I've discovered something very serious about Gabriel's treatment." He told her about Dr. Moore's visit, about his findings regarding the medications, and about his suspicions that Gabriel was being used as a guinea pig in illegal experiments. Carmen listened in silence, but Edward could see the anger growing in her eyes. My God. They're doing this to a child? It seems so, and now I need evidence to prove it. Mr. Morrison, there's something I found yesterday and I wasn't sure if I should tell you. What is it? Carmen went to her bag and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. I found this in the bin in Gabriel's room. The nurse threw it away, but something told me to keep it. It was a copy of an email. Edward read it quickly and felt his legs weaken. It was a communication between Marlene and someone named Dr. Peterson from Biotech Research. The subject was Patient GM, Phase 3 Protocol, and it talked about adjusting dosages to maintain the state of dependency and avoid premature recovery. Carmen, do you understand what this means? That they don't want Gabriel to get better. They want to keep him sick on purpose. Edward sat down heavily in the armchair. The reality was even worse than he had imagined. It wasn't just medical error or excessive medication. It was a deliberate conspiracy to keep his son sick, likely to test experimental drugs. Mr. Morrison, Carmen said softly, Sophia always says that the truth is like the sun. It can stay hidden behind the clouds for a long time, but eventually it comes out and shines on everything. Edward looked at Carmen with gratitude. Thank you for keeping this paper, and thank you for taking care of Gabriel with such love. What are you going to do now? Edward took a deep breath. I'm going to save my son, and I'm going to make sure everyone responsible for this pays for what they've done. That night, Edward did not give Gabriel his nightly medication. For the first time in almost a year, his son slept without being artificially sedated, and for the first time in a long time, Edward felt there was real hope of getting back the cheerful, vibrant boy Gabriel had been before all of this began. The plan was set. With Dr. Moore's help, he would gradually detoxify Gabriel. With Carmen's help, he would gather evidence against those responsible. And with the help of the pure friendship that had blossomed between Gabriel and Sophia, he would give his son back the will to live that had been stolen from him. The war against those who had tried to destroy his family was just beginning. 3 months after the truth was uncovered, the mansion that once breathed sadness and silence had transformed into a true home again. The sound of laughter echoed through the hallways, and Gabriel ran through the garden chasing Sophia in a game of tag that had become their daily routine. Edward watched from the porch, still marveling at his son's complete transformation. Gabriel had regained not only his physical health, but also the vibrant personality he possessed before the terrible conspiracy that almost destroyed his life. The boy was taller, stronger, and his eyes shone with the curiosity and joy Edward thought he had lost forever. "Dad!" Gabriel shouted, running towards the porch. "Sophia said today we're going to make paper airplanes that really fly." "That's great!" "Son, have you decided where you're going to test them?" "In the field behind the house. Sophia said there's enough wind there for them to fly really far." Edward smiled. The friendship between Gabriel and Sophia had blossomed beautifully and naturally. Sophia continued to spend her days at the mansion while Carmen worked, but now she was not just the employee's daughter. She had become practically a sister to Gabriel, and Edward was seriously considering officially adopting her. Carmen had shown interest in the idea, especially after everything they had been through together. "Mr. Morrison," Carmen said, approaching with a tray of fresh lemonade. A letter from the lawyer arrived. Edward opened the envelope carefully. It was confirmation that Dr. Fitzgerald had been sentenced to 20 years in prison for his participation in illegal experiments on minors. Marlene had received a lesser sentence in exchange for her full cooperation with the investigation. The Biotech Research Laboratory had been permanently shut down, and its directors had also been imprisoned. But the news that impacted Edward the most was at the end of the letter. The exhumation of Helen's body had confirmed his worst suspicions. There were traces of a toxic substance in her system that were not present in the original autopsy report. Helen had been poisoned, and the car accident had been staged to cover up the murder. Those responsible for her death were also being brought to justice. Edward closed his eyes, feeling a mixture of pain and relief. Pain for confirming that Helen had been murdered for trying to protect Gabriel. Relief for knowing that her death had not been in vain and that all the culprits were paying for their crimes. "Bad news?" Carmen asked, noticing his expression. Actually, it's good news. Justice is being served finally. During lunch, Edward gathered Gabriel and Sophia for a special conversation. There was an important decision he wanted to make, with the participation of the two children who had become the center of his renewed life. Gabriel, Sophia, you both know that I love you very much, don't you? We know, they replied in unison, exchanging knowing glances. I've been thinking about something. How would you feel if we all became a real family? If Sophia became my daughter too, and you were officially brother and sister? Gabriel leaped from his chair, beaming. Really, Dad? Sophia would live here forever. Sophia looked at Carmen, who nodded with tears in her eyes. I would love that, Mr. Morrison. I've always wanted an older brother. Older? Gabriel protested, laughing. You're only 6 months younger than me. 6 months is a long time, Sophia retorted, teasing Gabriel into a friendly argument that made all the adults present burst into laughter. That afternoon, while the children played in the garden and Carmen organized the final details of her permanent move to the mansion, Edward received an unexpected visit. It was Dr. Moore, who had become not only the family's trusted physician, but also a great friend. How is our little miracle? She asked, watching Gabriel teach Sophia how to do a cartwheel on the grass. Better every day. Sometimes I'm afraid this is all a dream. Edward, what happened to Gabriel is proof that true love and friendship have a healing power that goes far beyond what traditional medicine can explain. Do you think Sophia really saved his life? Dr. Moore smiled. There's no doubt about it. When Gabriel was being systematically poisoned, he had completely lost the will to live. Sophia gave him back the memory that the world could be a beautiful and joyful place, and that memory is what gave his little body the strength to fight against the toxins. Edward nodded, watching the two children run after butterflies. And now, are there any special precautions I need to take with him? Gabriel is completely healed, Edward, physically and emotionally. He just needs love, affection, and the certainty that he will never go through something like that again. And he will have that every day of his life. A week later, Sophia's adoption process was finalized. Edward organized a party in the garden to celebrate the family's new configuration. Only a few close friends were invited, but everyone present knew the importance of that moment. Gabriel and Sophia had chosen to plant a tree together in the garden, symbolizing the growth of their new family. It was a small jacaranda, just like the one under which Sophia used to draw when it all began. This tree will grow with our family, Sophia said, throwing soil over the seedling's roots. And when it's really big, our children will be able to play under it, Gabriel added, making everyone laugh with his premature seriousness when talking about the future. Children? Edward asked, amused. You're already thinking about that? Of course, Sophia replied naturally. We'll have lots of children so they can play together and never feel lonely. Edward exchanged an emotional look with Carmen, who was now officially part of the family, not just as an employee, but as Sophia's mother and his partner in raising the two children. During the party, Gabriel gave a speech that surprised everyone with its maturity and depth. I wanted to thank everyone who helped me get better, especially Sophia, who taught me that even when you're very sad, there are still beautiful things to see in the world. And Mrs. Carmen, who took care of me as if I were her own son, and my dad, who never gave up on saving me, even when I had forgotten how to smile. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden when Gabriel finished speaking. Edward picked him up, feeling the healthy weight of the son he had fully recovered. 6 months later, life had found its new perfect rhythm. Gabriel had returned to school and was excelling as one of the brightest students in his class. Sophia was adapting wonderfully to her new private school, where her sensitivity and emotional intelligence impressed teachers and classmates alike. Edward had gradually resumed control of the company, but now with a completely different perspective on work and family. He established strict hours to be present at home, never missing family dinners or weekends with the children. Carmen had become much more than an employee. She was the matriarch of the house, the person who kept everything organized and running with love and efficiency. Edward had insisted she take a business administration course, and now she also helped with the family business, demonstrating a natural intelligence for management that surprised everyone. On the first anniversary of the truth's discovery, Edward organized a special gathering in the garden. He called Gabriel, Sophia, and Carmen to sit under the jacaranda tree, which had already grown considerably. "A year ago, we discovered that bad people had tried to destroy our family," Edward began. "But we also discovered that true love is stronger than any evil. Do you want to know what I've learned this past year?" The children nodded attentively. "I learned that family isn't just about who you're born with. It's about who chooses to stay together, to care for one another, and to fight for each other's dreams. I learned that a happy child heals faster than any medicine, and I learned that sometimes angels come into our lives disguised as simple people who just know how to love properly." Sophia smiled. "Like my mom and me?" "Exactly like you two." Gabriel stood up and hugged Edward tightly. "Dad, I love our new family." "I do too, son, and we're going to take good care of it forever." That night, after the children were asleep, Edward went up to his office and wrote a letter that would never be sent, but that he needed to write. It was a letter to Helen, telling her about everything that had happened, about how strong and happy Gabriel was, about how the family had expanded in a wonderful way, and about how her love continued to live on in every gesture of affection he showed his children. He ended the letter with a promise. "Helen, I swear I will never forget your sacrifice. You died protecting our son, and now he is growing up surrounded by love and security. Gabriel has a wonderful sister who loves him unconditionally, and I have learned to be the present father you always wanted me to be. Our family is complete and happy, and you live on in every smile of our children." He placed the letter in a special box where he kept photos and memories of Helen. One day, when Gabriel was older, he would show him everything that had happened. But for now, his son deserved only to live the full and joyful childhood that had been stolen from him for so long. Outside, the jacaranda tree swayed gently in the night wind, its leaves whispering like prayers of gratitude. In the garden where Sophia once drew heart-shaped clouds, there were now scattered toys, marks of happy games, and the certainty that here lived a family who had discovered that the true miracle of healing happens not just in the body, but mainly in the heart. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Gabriel, Sophia, and Edward has deeply touched your hearts. This narrative reminds us that even in the darkest moments of life, there is always a light waiting to shine. True love, sincere friendship, and the courage to fight for the truth are forces capable of overcoming any adversity. If this story stirred emotions in you, if it brought tears to your eyes or warmed your hearts, please leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and share in the comments which moment marked you the most. Every day, we bring intense and transformative stories like this one, which reveal the beauty and strength of the human spirit. Until our next meeting, always remember, where there is true love, there is hope. And where there is hope, miracles happen.